I thank you so much for having me here. It's an absolute privilege. You don't know how much. We have a shared heritage, and as my good friend David Fergan likes to say, the churches of God have a shared heritage. And my grandfather, Duggar, didn't quite get along with Herbert, and so they went their separate ways, and we wound up different congregations. But what I have learned so much in my fellowship in Wichita with the other churches of God is we still have that shared and powerful heritage. My mother, Orabelle, just died this last Sunday, and we will be gathering next week in Fairview, Oklahoma with my family, and we will be celebrating our heritage. And what I want to talk about today is the power and the value of our heritage. It is far more valuable and far more powerful than we realize. And we do not need to be ashamed of it at all. Last night, as I visited with Wynn about this heritage, it was really fun talking about our different perspectives. I got the Wynn pinions, and I guess really the Wynn Kim pinions, right? About our heritage. And, we're looking at the same thing from different angles. And I got to noticing we sang this song, Victory in Jesus. And when I was a small child, my father pastored a church in Ontario, California. And we had this African-American gentleman there, Brother Zeb. And Brother Zeb, he was a snappy dresser. He dressed and had this pinstripe suit. And he loved that song. And he would get up front and he would sing that song. And this, before I could read, I'm listening to the words of this song and watching Brother Zeb, and he'd say, and he socked me and he boxed me, and to me it was the boxing song. He socked me and he boxed me with his redeeming blood, and I just knew it because it continued on, and he punched me to victory beneath the cleansing blood. That was the boxing song that was about, and later, when I learned to read, it's like, well, this song isn't about boxing at all. I was so disappointed. Perspective. I grew up seeing it that way. And then when we learn to read, do we change our perspective? Not always. By the time I'm through here today, you're going to understand why many of us do not change our perspective despite the print on the page. Despite how illogical it is, we don't change our perspective. In Genesis 22, you don't need to turn there, you're familiar with this story, when Abraham was going to sacrifice his only son. His only son. Because he was willing to do that, God said, because you have not withheld your son, your only son. He was everything. This is us. We've put everything. Lived my whole life for the Church of God. Child, adult, my family heritage, both sides of my family, grandfather, great-grandfather were ministers. I've put everything into it. God said to Abraham, because you've not withheld your son, your only son, I will bless you. And your seed will possess the gate of their enemies. I want you to remember that. Just pin that up there. Gate. Key word. Gate. What does it mean to possess the gate of your enemies. Do you know, this is in our... There are things that are planted in the Bible as we study. That from a child you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise unto salvation. And we, how many of us have been anointed and prayed for? We've been anointed and prayed for. Oh, well, you know, that didn't work. I was still sick, or I didn't get better, or, you know, that wasn't healed, wasn't it? We're learning. Something's being instilled in us there. Because when the sacrifice was brought forward, the priest anointed and laid his hands on the head of that sacrifice. See, we're learning in the Word of God that Romans 12, I beseech you therefore before God that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable. We were dedicated to God repeatedly. We were dedicated to God. And because of that, we're the seed that will possess the gate of our enemies. And you have that power. You have it. I know you do. It just needs to be awakened in you. You just need to remember it, that you have that power. Because the fact is, the reality is, God's church is stalled. It's like, hello, we're small, we have empty seats, we're losing our children. I'm not talking about the church of God, I'm talking about Christianity in general. We're stalled, people. But it's only because we don't realize how powerful we really are. You know, Freud taught that the primary human motivation was sex. And if anyone has a problem with me standing up here in church and saying sex, sorry, we can't get away from it. Freud taught that the primary human motivation is sex, but you can't get away from it. Go out there, advertising, media, Hollywood, it's in your face constantly. Because, some say today, well, Freud really didn't mean that, and this is what he really meant. I don't care. We're going to give him credit for it because that's basically what humankind and the media count on, and it works for them, okay? But you know what? God's way is entirely opposite. The patterns of God are perfect. God's way is exactly opposite of man and civilization. Because the fact is, in the first 3 chapters of Genesis, we can find the true primary motivations of mankind. And you know what they are? The first one is in the creation of man, for those that think that a woman was just an insignificant little bone, it tells us that God created man, and that's Adam, that's mankind, in His image. Male and female created He them. They were both created together, okay? And then God said, later He says, it is not good that Adam doesn't have a helpmeet. Well, we misunderstand that helpmeet. That isn't the get me coffee card. No, that isn't what helpmeet is. That word, if you look at it in the Hebrew, what that helpmeet is it's someone to oppose you. It's someone to say, you need to do this. And why do men and women fight so much? Because guess what? There ain't anyone that knows me like my wife does. Here's the difficulty with it. The difficulty with it is that we have as strong an appetite for relationship and knowledge, information, as we do for food. We're drawn to knowledge. Our minds want to be active. And we satisfy it with media. I say to the kids, but I don't know that the kids are all alone here. I say to the kids, we turn on a movie and we get on media, we get on our device, and we accomplish something through that hero in the movie. And we build a relationship through that hero in the movie. And when the movie's over and we turn it off, we're all alone. It's not real. It's not real, it's vicarious. And this is why people today in the world are very hungry. We don't think we have the power to feed them, but we do. They want to be fed real food, and they're not getting real food. And the big tragedy to our children is that the role models that they see in media, not only are they not real, they're not touchable. They can't touch them. They can touch you. They can believe that they can be like you because they know you, they touch you, you recognize them. They know they can't ever be like Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie. They know they can't ever be that. And so our kids become very desperate. They become very desperate. And they do a lot of desperate things because they're not really being fed. So I have a passage today, and my passage is Psalms 127, and I'm going to stay right there. Psalms 127 is all about our heritage. And I'm going to go through that verse by verse. If you want to turn to that, please do. I will tell you, Psalms 127 begins with, it says it's a song of degrees. And this is not, a song of degrees is not something that Zondervan put in there. It's actually in the Hebrew. And it means exactly what it sounds like. Degrees, it's meant to elevate you. Psalms 127 was a song. We're meant to sing it, and it's meant to elevate you. And that's what we're going to do with this chapter today, just 5 verses. We're going to elevate you, okay? It begins with, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. You know what? The Lord built this house. The Lord built the churches of God, our shared heritage. Don't be ashamed of it. Don't doubt the value of your heritage. But what this is about, it's really about original sin. Remember what I was saying, that eat of this fruit and you will know. And what do? We say, because I know, I'm going to build this city and this house. That's called Babel. Now, we want to refer to it as the Tower of Babel, but actually Genesis 11 says a city and a tower. Very important, because the city is the relationship. Remember, we've got these 2 things here. Remember these. Relationship and knowledge. Relationship and knowledge. The primary biblical human motivators are relationship and knowledge. Okay? And Babel, Genesis 11, starts out with relationship, city. Okay? Relationship. Civilization. We can't separate the 2. Okay? City and tower. What's the tower? The tower is knowledge. That's what the tower is. Well, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh but in vain. So here's what happens. Again, God's patterns are exactly opposite of man's pattern. We live in Western civilization, and we are subject to Cartesian philosophy. And whether you've heard of Rene Descartes or not, you've heard of it. You've heard of it. Western civilization and its philosophy has an effect on us. What Descartes said was, I think, therefore I am. Okay? And really what he said was cogito, ergo sum. Cogito, cognition. My cognition makes, ergo sum, makes me complete. Oh, now, that's the mantra of Facebook, isn't it? I think. My cognition makes me complete. You better put a bunch of likes on there because I know. That's original sin. Eat of this fruit and you'll be as a God. You will know. Do you know what? It's exactly opposite. God's patterns are always exactly opposite of man. You ever notice the spirit of the beast that goes downward in the earth and the spirit of God goes back from whence it came? You know that Nebuchadnezzar's image goes down. But God's way goes up. Okay? God's patterns are always opposite because it shouldn't be I think, therefore I am. It should be I am in Christ. Therefore I have the mind of Christ. I am in Christ, therefore I think. See, God answered Genesis 11 with Genesis 12. Genesis 12 is the call of Abraham. Genesis 11 is Babel, the city and tower. Genesis 12 is the call of Abraham. It's very interesting, though. So these Babylonians, they wanted to build a city, relationship, and they wanted to build a tower, knowledge. And God answered them with relationship. He didn't say, oh, come here, let me build you a university and tell you what you need to know. Relationship. He said, my answer to your dilemma is relationship. That was the answer to Babel. So, here's what happens when we get that Cartesian philosophy confused with the relationship with Christ. Here's what happens. Verse 2, Psalms 127, it is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrow, for so he giveth his beloved sleep. See, interesting that bread there is the same bread, the same Hebrew word, right there in Psalms 127, as in Genesis. Because here's what God said. Because Adam and Eve said, well, we think we know, we're going to eat this fruit so that we know. And God kicked him out and he said, go out there and by the sweat of your brow, see if you can find bread. Same bread. It's the bread of communion. It's the bread of relationship. Okay? Because we think because of what we know, we're going to build relationship. It's the opposite. It should be the relationship that brings what we know. Okay? And so what happens is, because we've got that backward, we start building, taking our positions. We start building our positions. We start building our cities. And what do we do around our cities? We build walls. We build walls around our city. And we put watchmen on those walls. And we defend. We defend. Because here's the labor, the bread of sorrows. Except the Lord build a house, they labor in vain. The more we invest in a position, the thicker the wall gets. We invest in that position, and let me tell you, we better make that wall strong. And we better put our guards up there, because this is our position. You know, Jeremiah 3, 23 says, you don't have to turn there. Psalms 127 is, I want you to meditate on. Jeremiah 3:23 says, truly in vain salvation is hoped for from the hills and from the multitude of mountains. Truly, the Lord our God is the salvation of Israel. What is a hill and a mountain? Oh, just trust me. The hill and a mountain are governments and organizations. You know very well that if the highest thing in the world were a gopher hole, there'd be two fools fighting over who got to stand on top of it. See, in ancient times, a higher point was defensible. They built their cities on top of mountains, on top of hills. And they put walls around them, okay? So salvation, truly in vain, salvation is hoped for from the hills and the multitude of mountains. It's organizations and governments. That's what mountains and hills are. And we build these walls up there. Well, do you know how hard it can be to bring down a wall? Because here's what happens. Do we have any combat veterans here? Do you know that once you have shed blood for a position, you don't want to abandon that position? It becomes very difficult to abandon a position once you've shed blood for it. A veteran becomes patriotic. A veteran loves their country because they've fought for it and they've shed blood for it. They have not just shed their own blood and the bloods of their buddies. They've shed the blood of others for that position. And now you have to defend it. Well, you know what? We, Christians, have something in common with the combat veterans. And it explains why. Remember what I said in the beginning about perspective? That if we don't learn how to bring down a wall, it doesn't matter if I learn to read. I learned from Brother Zeb that Victory in Jesus was a boxing song, and I'm not going to change my opinion because that's the way I was raised. See, every time a church splits because we have to defend our position, blood is shed. I have never seen a church split that there were not casualties. And I mean casualties meaning the people that didn't go that way and they didn't go that way. They went that way. They fell on their face, and it's usually the kids. Why? Because we have to defend our positions. And blood is shed. And once we shed blood, it becomes very difficult for us to admit that our position might be in error. Okay? So these first two verses of Psalms 127, it is vain for you to rise up early, to sit up late, to eat the bread of sorrows. For so he giveth his beloved sleep. Because you know what? We lay in bed at night and something about, oh, these things just bother us. Because deep down inside, we know it isn't right. And we can't sleep. Deep down inside, we know that relationship is more important than what I know. And we can't sleep. So here's what happens. What happens is the story of David and Goliath. We have the army of God over here on this mountain, and we have the army of the Philistines over here. And we don't have any trouble believing that God created the earth. We don't have any trouble believing that God someday, all of these prophecies that we learned are going to come true. Yep, they're going to happen. But right now, today, this giant, that is stealing our children and wrecking our homes and dividing our churches, we can't deal with him. Oh, wait a minute. It isn't the giant that's wrecking our homes and destroying our churches and it's the Philistines. It's the Philistines that are doing it. It's not Goliath isn't the one doing it. It's the Philistines. So who's Goliath? Who's Goliath? I'm going to tell you here today that maybe we need to rethink the story of David and Goliath. David didn't win the battle that day because Goliath wasn't the enemy. You know that? David did not win the battle that day. Do you know what Goliath means? Very interesting if you look up what Goliath means in the Hebrew. Boy, names in the Bible. You know, you read these genealogies, and if you think, well, that's just kind of a gap there in the Bible. You can't even pronounce those things. You start looking up the meanings. Very interesting. Goliath means exposed. That's what the name Goliath means. Exposed, denuded, revealed. Remember the king has no clothes? See, there are obvious things. Really big obvious things. The king has no clothes, but nobody's going to tell him because he's the king. You know what Goliath is? Goliath is the 9-foot tall elephant in the room that we don't want to admit. All of the things that we don't want to admit that keep us from claiming our victory from our heritage. And David comes along. Oh, I just love what David says. David says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine to stand before the armies of the living God? Not the God of yesterday, not the God of tomorrow, not the God of what I grew up with, not the God of the prophecy that's going to happen. What's the challenge in front of you today? What is the challenge right in front of you today? Every story of faith in the Bible, I'll challenge you to look at it. Every story of faith in the Bible wasn't about faith in tomorrow. It was about faith in what's happening right now. The raging sea in front of you, the enemy in front of you, the illness in front of you. What is your challenge right here, right now? Who is this giant to stand in front of the armies of the living God? I'm going to come back to David. So, lo, verse 3, children are a heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is His reward. I worked in the medical field for years. I was a flight paramedic, and we did high-risk OB transfers, and so I had to spend a lot of time in OB. I saw a lot of babies born, and every time, knowing what happens when that baby takes its first breath, what's happening physiologically in the heart, the changes that happen immediately, no matter how many times I saw it, it always brought a tear to my eye. When that baby would take that first breath, always brought a tear to my eye. That first breath, the breath of God. God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Children are a heritage of the Lord. You have the breath of God in you. But this is a circular verse. Through the reward. Whose reward? God's reward. Whose reward? God's reward. That's how we return the Spirit, the breath, back to God from whence it came. The fruit of the womb. Well, where's the womb? This is the womb. the womb is what produced you. This is something Wynn and Kim and I discussed last night that we agree so much on. When we were growing up, I had many mothers and fathers in the church, and aunts and uncles and grandpas and grandmas. And I was privileged to travel out to Ontario, California for the 50th anniversary of the church that my father pastored out there. And I had my grandson with me. And when I was little, I remember my mother saying, well, Vic and I knew we weren't very good looking. Well, I'm thinking, well, then I must not be very good looking. But when my other mothers saw my school pictures, they said, oh, Peter, you're a very fine-looking young man. See, when you have a womb, a church, you don't have to be a perfect parent because we're going to pick up the slack for each other. And this is one of the things that's happened with the media thing. We don't spend as much time as we should together. And we miss that. Our children need that. All of those other mothers. This is the womb. The fruit of the womb is His reward. Our powerful heritage is God's reward. As arrows in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that has his quiver full of them, for they shall not be ashamed. Happy is the man that has his quiver full of them, they shall not be ashamed. Here's what happens. I've been ashamed of my church. Like David, I came along to my brothers, and I'm not sure which part I played there, whether I was David's older brothers or whether I was David. I just know I came along and said, I'm ashamed of my church. This ain't working, guys. At one point I said, I repent, I'm a false prophet. This can't be happening. And what immediately happens? Well, yeah, brothers got angry with me. Of course they got angry with me, and I got angry with them. And that's why I say I'm not sure which side I played there, but I was ashamed of my church. Don't be ashamed of your church. They shall not be ashamed. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. They shall not be ashamed. You know what? When I was in college, I moved back out to Joplin, Missouri to continue college, and I became a youth pastor of the Joplin Church. And I got to back up. There was a young man that attended a family, and the father had died. It was just a grandmother, mother, and this little boy and little girl. And when I was probably 14 or 15 years old, and his mother would call my mother, and my mother would say, Peter, you need to go over to Joe's house and give him a spanking. His mother would call and say, can you send Peter over and give Joe a spanking? They couldn't handle him. He was just 8 years old. They couldn't handle him. I'd ride my bike over there, and I said, come on, Joe. And we'd go off in the other room, and I'd talk to him. I'd bang on the wall and say, yell, Joe. I don't think I ever hit him. I tried. What did I know? Well, later when I came out to Joplin, they had moved out there, and we're attending the church there, and I became the youth pastor. And Joe was 15, and he was a real problem. I had about 30 kids in that youth group, and these kids had so many problems, and I just couldn't deal with them. But I tried. There were times that there was one youth service where Joe would challenge me physically, and I had to put him down and sit on him to continue the youth service. That's all I ever did for Joe. I pretended to spank him, and I sat on him. That's all I ever did. And then Joe got arrested for armed robbery at 15 years old, and he went off in the system. I quit. I'm not doing any good here. I went into the medical field. 10 years later, I was working in the emergency room in Berryville, Arkansas, and Joe walks through the door. And he said, "I bet you don't know who I am." And I said, "Are you kidding, Joe? I'd recognize you anywhere. What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I just graduated from West Ark College in Fort Smith with my paramedic degree, and I heard through the medical people that you were working up here. And I have my fiance in the car, and I just had to come up here and let you know that I done good." Wow. Why? He drove over 200 miles to come see me. Why me? What did I ever do? I was a pretty powerless young man. But you know what? I was the only man in Joe's life that tried to discipline him. And that's powerful. And so when he done good, he had to come up there because he had to hear me say as a father figure, "Joe, I'm proud of you." And I said, "Joe, I'm proud of you. I think I'm ashamed of me, but I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you, Joe. Let me meet your fiance." See? Many of you, most of you, have invested much more than that in your church. I was telling Wynn that I watch him with people, and he's really good with people. He remembers their names. He connects with them. He's investing in people. Because if there was an error that we in the Church of God made, is that we had way too much focus on the grand events, the sky splitting open. Goliath wasn't the enemy, and David didn't win the battle that day. It's not grand events that build the body of Christ. Remember that. It's not grand events that build the body of Christ. It's one small step at a time. When the mothers of Israel say, "My, you're a good-looking young man." When you give someone a smile instead of anger when they cut you off in traffic. It's moments. It's moments that are the promise of salvation. That's how the city of righteousness is built. One small stone at a time, not grand events at a time. Goliath just represented what's obvious to anyone looking from the outside. Yeah, those Christians are a pretty powerless people. Because you know what happened that day? It says that the children of Israel spoiled the Philistines that day. Why didn't they spoil them the day before? If they could spoil the Philistines, why didn't they do it the day before? Because of that giant. Value that has made us believe we're not valuable. And because they were not unified. Because they built so many walls. Those walls that were defined by what I know, here's my doctrine, and therefore I can't fellowship with you because my doctrine's different than yours. John 17:21 is the true Lord's Prayer. What we call the Lord's Prayer, Our Father which art in heaven, was Jesus' prayer for us, what we should pray. Jesus' prayer in John 17 was, Father, let them be one, so that the world may know. It isn't grand speeches and sermons. It isn't our doctrine. It isn't our cathedrals that are a witness. It is our unity that is a witness. So, they shall not be ashamed, but shall speak with the enemy in the gate. What is the gate? Remember I said gate. Remember? Because you've not withheld your son. You provided this womb. I'll bless you, and your seed will speak with the enemy in the gate. Wait a minute. He didn't say kill him on the field of battle. He said speak, not kill. He said speak. What is a gate? Oh, we know what a gate is. We know this. A gate is the passage into your city. And what's a city? That's relationship. A gate is the place where someone comes into sweet fellowship and communion with you. It's the opportunity. And where is the gate? There are many gates. When do you intersect with another human being? Every time you encounter another human being, that is a gate. That is an opportunity. And what are we doing today? Christians out there yelling insults at who they consider to be the enemy. We got to take those liberals down. And we're going to use Trump? Are you kidding? Are we trusting in the hills and the mountains? Sorry. You are the people of God. And you have more power than the governmental system out there. And we don't defeat them. That's not what we do. That's not what God called for. You speak with them in the gate. That's what you do. But we still have this nagging problem of the walls that divide us. How do we take down the walls that divide us? Well, remember, we've built up these walls because of original sin, what we know. The wall between CGI and the Church of God Seventh Day and all the other iterations of the churches of God. And even the wall between us and the Baptists. And you know what? Even the wall between us and the Muslims. Whatever the wall, because our ideology, our dogma is different that we have built. And we think they're the enemy? No, that just means the one in opposition to us. So, Zechariah tells us that Jerusalem shall be inhabited without walls. What is Jerusalem? The city of peace. Shalom. Jerusalem shall be inhabited without walls. So, this land is God's. Quit looking for tomorrow. Quit looking for the sky to split open. The land belongs to the Lord. Okay? It belongs to the Lord. And I'm going to do one more thing. Wynn and I discussed this last night. We do one more thing to remove our dependence on prophecy. How long does it take to become a false prophet? Until you discourage the first child. Until you lose the first child. And not just children. Now, I'm not talking about child in terms of chronology. I'm talking about child, even spiritual child. When your declaration that I know and I'm waiting for that latter rain or that whatever, and therefore I can't represent the Prince of Peace today, and you discourage that person, you just became a false prophet. I don't care if everything you prophesied comes true tomorrow, you just became a false prophet. Okay? Today is the day of salvation, and it's Christ in you, the hope of glory. So how do we remove the walls? Well, immediately, that was the first lesson the children of Israel were given, wasn't it? Jericho. And we know the story of Jericho, don't we? Because we come up here and Jericho, boy, it gives us how thick these walls. These are thick walls. These are big, thick walls. Now we say, okay, how are we going to become unified? How are we going to do this? I've studied mediation. We're going to mediate. Oh, we're going to do this. Oh, we're going to cry on each other's shoulders. Everybody's going to have an opinion on how we should unify, on how we should handle these things. And you know what God's response was? Shut up. Just shut up. Be quiet. I don't want to hear it. Just walk. Just walk together. Don't cry on their shoulder. This isn't Jerry Springer. You don't have to go back and try to work out all of the things. We're going to my mom's funeral next week, and there's going to be family there that I haven't seen in years, and boy, we've really differed theologically to the point that we just had to separate, go our separate ways, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, how am I going to face this person, and how am I going to do that? Just walk together. Just sit down and eat together, and we'll talk about our grandkids. Just walk together. Be quiet. Because we don't know anyway. Just walk together. Just walk together. Just walk together. And when you've walked together long enough that you can speak with one voice, the walls will come down. And you say, well, now wait a minute, Peter. You said the patterns of God are perfect. And that was Jericho. I mean, they were heathens. They were pagans. What do we need to get behind that wall for? What's back there? What's over there in those, them Catholics or them Muslims or them, whatever, them Hindus, them Sufis, whatever. Why do we need to break down a wall between us and them? We don't want to be with them anyway. Well, you know why? Because behind every wall that divides us from someone else who has the breath of God in them, encapsulated right there in the form of Rahab, is the promise of Christ. That's value. There is value that cannot be ignored behind every wall that divides us. And they have to come down. May God bless you.